Okay, guys, welcome to Tuesday, September 15th. This teacher video will walk you through the slides for this day. Before I go on and do my actual teacher video, I do want to take a minute to talk about the pre-assessment. So you can read the FAQ on your own, but the pre-assessment is just a small, very short quiz that we would do on Fridays. Remember, Fridays are pre-assessment days. We talked about that earlier in the school year. This Friday, we will have our very first pre-assessment. And so the pre-assessment does not count for a grade, but you should take the pre-assessment seriously. We have two different learning paths. A learning path is basically the order in which you will complete lessons. Okay, so whenever I say learning path, I'm referring to the order in which you will complete your lessons. So your pre-assessment determines your learning path. It determines the direction you will go moving forward on that particular skill. Now, everything that we do is all about mastery. Okay, so for our pre-assessments right now, we are using 70% as our mastery target. Of course, I want you to score higher than 70%. I feel all students need to score 80 or above, but 70 is our mastery target. So students who score 70% or higher on pre-assessments will enter the Let's Roll path. That path, is situated differently than the Let's Go Get It path. So if you score lower than 70%, 69 or under, you enter the Let's Go Get It path. So every student needs to take the pre-assessment on Friday. I would love for you all to come to the live on Friday if at all possible, and we all take the pre-assessment together. Every student, I'm repeating myself, needs to take the pre-assessment on Fridays. If you do not take the pre-assessment on Friday, you will not be able to go back and take the pre-assessment, okay? So what happens if you do not take the pre-assessment? If you do not take the pre-assessment, you will automatically enter the Let's Go Get It path, which means that your path will be different than the Let's Roll path. And remember, the pre-assessment is how I know which path you need. So you could quite possibly end up on a pathway that you might not necessarily need because you did not take the pre-assessment. So I will repeat that every student needs to take the pre-assessment Friday, and preferably you need to take it during our live session. So you are going to need some paper. We are going to take standard notes. You remember standard notes from a couple of weeks ago. And so we did not take notes last week because we did not have a new standard. Remember, I told you that every time we have a new standard, we will take standard notes. And so we call that our standard breakdown. Now you have a graphic organizer template set up just like this in your binder. And I see an error on my slides. This is not your standard notes template. It should simply say standard notes, okay? So just standard notes. So this is your standard breakdown for RL.7.3. I will correct that, but there will be an error in the video, but I will correct it in the slides. So go ahead and take a moment to set up your paper. You can pause the video as you get your paper set up. You do need to write your MLA date, your name and your MLA date and class period and RL.7.3. That's your standard note. So you might say, Ms. Foster, didn't we just do this one? So we did not do RL.7.3. We did RL.6.3 as a review to prepare you for this particular standard. Once you have done your MLA heading and you have titled your slide, your paper, your notes paper, you are then going to draw all of your boxes and make sure you label all of your boxes. For my hyper organized and creative folk, if you want to add color to your boxes, you are welcome to do that, but do not add color before you write. So you can go back with like a colored pencil. Please don't do it with a marker, but you may go back with a colored pencil or crayon if you just have to have some color. Okay, so we should be ready to write. The very first thing you are going to write is the standard. And the standard for this week is to analyze how particular elements of a story or drama, interact. Example, how setting shapes the characters or plot. Analyze how particular elements of a story or drama interact. Example, how setting shapes the characters or plot. So remember, right now, we're simply writing the standard in the gray box that reads standard. You can pause the video if you need to while you write your standard in the standard box. Now, after you have your standards, you know that our next step is to write down verbs and nouns. And remember that you put the verbs in the verb box, and I've highlighted the verbs in yellow, and you put the nouns and the content words in the noun box, and I've highlighted the nouns in blue. But please remember to leave space for definitions. The very next slide will define every word we have highlighted. So right now, let's write our verbs, analyze, interact, and shapes in the verbs box. And let's write our nouns, elements, story, drama, setting, characters, plot in the nouns box. You may pause the video if you need to. Now we're writing our definitions. So you should have the word analyze in the verbs box. We're going to define all verbs first. Analyze means to break down or break apart. When we analyze a story, we want to think about the smaller parts of a story. Okay, so we need to be able to identify the small parts of a story. We need to be able to break the story apart. Okay, so remember, a story is made up of smaller pieces. Those smaller pieces go together to make the whole. So we need to be able to examine characters and setting and the different elements of plots. We even need to be able to examine sentences and paragraphs and how they all work together. Okay, so we're breaking the story apart. Our next verb, interact. So interact simply means work together. So we are going to examine or analyze or break down or break apart how smaller pieces of a story work together. Our next verb, shapes. Shapes means to develop, form, mold, effect. Develops, forms, molds, effects. So notice that this part of the standard is in the parentheses. So this is just an example. So an example of how elements interact will be to examine how the setting interacts with the characters and the plot. So when the setting shapes the characters, the setting helps form the characters. Now our nouns. Elements. Elements are the smaller parts or details of a whole, in this case, a story or drama. So the particular elements are all of the smaller pieces of the story. Story. A story is an event or series of events. So you cannot have a story if something is not happening. There must be some events or some events, and there must be a conflict in order for there to be a story. Drama. A drama is simply a story written in the form of a play. You're familiar with dramas if you've ever read parts of Romeo and Juliet or you've watched the movie. All of those, so that movie was based on an actual play where there are roles, okay? So a drama is simply a story written in the form of a play. Dramas are meant to be acted, which is why those dramas could be made into movies. Our next noun, setting. So I know that you know setting is location and place, but what's new for you is that setting is also the social environment of a story. And we will talk about the social environment of Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. Our next noun, characters. Characters refer to the people or animals that make up the events of a story. And plot. Plot is simply the parts of a story, the exposition or introduction or beginning of a story, the rising action, I'm sorry for that typo, the rising action of a story, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution all make up the plot. Now we filled in our standard box, we filled in our verbs box and our noun box, and we have defined our verbs and our nouns. We are now down to the standard in my own words. Now for this particular box, remember that I do not tell you what to write in that box, but I do have some questions that you can think about to help you brainstorm what to write in that box. So the first thing I want you to do is to reflect. Reflect on everything you've written. Reflect on all of the words that you defined. You've defined analyze. You have defined elements and story and drama and setting and shapes and characters and plot. Now read those definitions. See how those words go together. Now consider the standard. Analyze how particular elements of a story or drama interact, how setting shapes the characters or plot. Now you need to ask yourself, what is it that Ms. Foster wants me to do? So we know that analyze means to break down. So I want you to break down something. What do I want you to break down? So I want you to break down the particular elements of a story. So what are elements? The small pieces. So I want you to break down the small pieces of a story to do what? So what's the last verb? Interact. So we are breaking down the small pieces of a story to see how they interact. Now, if I ask you to explain that to another student, what would you tell that student? Or if I ask you to tell your parents what we were studying this week, how would you explain it to your parents? Your answer to those questions is what I want you to write in the standard in my own words box. Take a moment to go ahead and write the standards in your own words. Feel free to pause the video if you need to. Standard goals. Now, our standard goals, I will always develop those goals for you. If we were all in a class together, we could brainstorm some goals together and come up with those. But since we are separated, I thought it might be easier for me to just go ahead and give you those goals. I like to list our goals in the form of I can statements because I know I want you to clearly know what I want you to be able to do. So we have 4 goals for this particular standard. I can outline the elements or parts of a story. I can explain how elements of a story work together. I can explain how characters develop. I can describe how the plot develops. So we want to be able to identify the elements of a story. So the different parts of a story, we want to be able to identify what those parts of the story are. So what are the parts, the events, the action that help make up the story? And then we want to be able to tell how those different parts work together, or the verb from the standard is interact. Next, we want to be able to look at our characters and tell how our characters grow or develop or change. And then we want to be able to look at the plot and describe the same thing, how the plot unfolds, okay? How the plot develops, how the story moves. Standard connections. So here is a time when you also have got to reflect. So think about what you said this standard means. Think about the goals that we have set. How could you apply the meaning of this standard to the world around you? Think about how you interact with elements around you. How could you apply this standard to your own life? And then lastly, what does mastery look like? So for this particular box, I have a sentence frame highlighted in yellow. I want you to start a sentence that reads, I will know I have got it when, and you fill in the blank. How will you know when you have mastered this standard? Think about your goals. Think about what the standard means. How will you know when you have mastered this standard? These are our notes for the week. Please make sure that you complete the exit ticket so that you will not be marked absent today. I did see some errors in my video, and I am correcting those in the slides. And so if you see things that are different in the slides than they were in the video, it's just because I've corrected a few things. I did not see anything that would stop you from being able to understand the standard. So none of those things that I need to correct will change any of the information I gave you in the video. Remember, you can rewind and pause as needed.